Hey, what's going on? I'm Mr. Sandman, and before I start, I want to explain how this mini-series will be structured. The first video will be about what we thought Halo Wars would be in 2007. The video after will discuss how Halo Wars could have improved. Finally, the last video will explain what I want to see in the sequel. There may be some overlapping ideas in each, but they will all have their own distinct topic. I'll have a link to each video in the description below, and an annotation on the screen at the end of the video. I want to take you back to E3 2007, when we first saw gameplay of Halo Wars. Back then, it was a much simpler time. Xbox mic still sounded like you were underwater. Halo 3 was set to release in 2007, along with Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Bioshock, and games like Guitar Hero was still a thing. And then along came this trailer. I was skeptical at first as to how Halo could become an RTS game on a console. I mean, we had Supreme Commander before, but it played terribly on the console. But this trailer showed promise. To illustrate what I mean, I'll show little bits of it now. As we come through the beginning, we see a new human air vehicle, a Hawk. This is pretty cool, as before we didn't have anything like this in any previous Halo game, apart from the Pelican and the Short Sword. In the final game, we have the Hornet as well, but because Halo 3 wasn't even out yet, we didn't know about Hornets. But it was definitely a nice touch to add more human air units. Before we have a look at this base, I want to drag your attention to the UI. More specifically, if you look to the bottom left, you'll see a group button. Perhaps this could have been the feature that was taken out to do with making your own groups, or maybe it had the same functionality as the down on the D-pad in Halo Wars today. For me, the down on the D-pad was just too inconsistent, especially in battles. You would just go between your base and the Marines in the reactor, back and forth, and hardly ever to the units that you wanted to look at. We then get a first-hand look at the base in Halo Wars. At first glance, it looks believable and coherent. It looks like everything has a purpose. Compared to the bases that are in the game now, which are so very basic, this looks much more organic and natural. We then see some in-game humans working on Warhogs, adding to the lived-in feel that this base creates. We then see a much more detailed airpad to what we have now. There are static Hawks on the runway, a helipad, a man directing airspace, "Get over here!" and a small hangar with a Hawk inside. If we compare that to the summit now, you can begin to see where my disappointment lies. Furthermore, you can see walls lining the perimeter of the base, a feature which could have been interesting to see in Halo Wars. In games such as Age of Mythology, they work well to create a true defensive position, which I feel was missed out on in Halo Wars. The only defensive capabilities you really could rely on was the terrain. We also see turret emplacements, a much more believable representation than the turrets on the bases we have now. Moving on, we can see missile silos. Again, we can see the detail in this base. The barrels and the watchtower aid in fleshing out the surrounding base. Perhaps instead of Forge's carpet bomb, this silo could have been built to activate a missile launch ability. We are then presented with Marines doing push-ups, another great example of what the final game missed out on. Kill him! It would have made the barracks building that we have now seem very primitive. The barracks in the game now, while it may look like a barracks building, holds no plausibility in the way it produces units. That's why I think it would have been cool to see some Marines in a firing range, or maybe flamethrowers checking their tanks, or even Spartans getting suited up. As we pan across, we can see supply pads as they used to be. In my opinion, both versions are just as good. I liked what they did in the final game, where they actually did put a lot of detail into such a small space. But I do prefer the lack of consistency in the placements of buildings. For example, the two supply pads on screen are flipped around from each other. Another cool thing that you can see on screen is that all buildings are partially connected to each other with temporary paths. I don't know how this could have been worked into multiplayer, but it adds a nice touch here. Then we have the vehicle depots. In all honesty, I prefer the ones in the game now. I do, however, like the way the vehicles come out as the ramps come down. But the one in the game now actually shows the vehicles being constructed. While it may not show a whole lot, it's decent. Perhaps a better way that the depot could have been represented could have been with the Spirit of Fire dropping in vehicles via Pelican. Maybe that could have been a boring method, but it's definitely more plausible. As for the circle menu, it's great the way it is in both the video and the game. No gripes with it whatsoever. Moving on, I much prefer the way the game looked in this demo. It looked much grittier. Perhaps the overuse of grey in all the vehicles was bad, but in the game now every unit looks like it's made of shiny Play-Doh. I have a feeling that this was due to internal company constraints at Ensemble. I had hoped in the game that the Covenant would get a much wider variety of weapons used by its infantry. Just like the humans had RPGs, Covenant should have had fewer rod cannons to match the Marines. Also in the demo, they used the gunner sound from the original Halo, which I much prefer. If you can hear the difference to what it is now, you will see what I mean. Personally, I wish they had kept it that way. Moving on to the battle scene. I feel like this is what the final game missed out on. Too much did the game rely on using one unit in multiplayer, for example mass tanks or mass Gauls or mass Banshees. There wasn't a whole lot of variation. You were basically punished for using mixed armies as seen on screen. The only useful infantry was ODST, as you could use them to trap enemy units, but Marines were all but useless against everything. I'm not sure how they could have made mixed armies more appealing an option, but I'm just saying it was a missed opportunity. I also love that in the demo, we can see Banshees doing barrel rolls, something that would have been nice to see in the final game as you boosted your Banshees across the map. It may have been scripted for the demo however. It need not have been during battle, or maybe it could have been an upgrade like Chaffbot to dodge missiles. Either way, it would have been a welcome addition. Apparently, in the final game there is rock paper scissors mechanics at play, where infantry beats aircraft, aircraft beats vehicles, and vehicles beat infantry. The last two work, but the first one doesn't. The infantry really have no use and viability in taking down aircraft. I mean, it could have been seen as a stretch to suggest that Needler grunts can deal decent damage against air, but I think my point here still stands. Here we can see the guy try and make the Scorpions go in front of the Wolverines. It demonstrates what really happens in the final game. Basically nothing occurs, and they spin their wheels. What would have been preferable would have been for the Wolverine to move out of the way so that the tank can go past, and for the Wolverine to move back into position if possible. That's something that really was an issue in Halo Wars. The fact is that vehicles will get stuck on edges of buildings and terrain and even each other. This made your units weak as they will get split apart as some try to catch up to the ones in front. In the final part we see the Scarab. I love the fact that they used the Halo 2 design, as it was much different to the one in Halo 3. It shows the fact that the game is set in 2025 and not 2552. Although when it opens its mouth, it kind of looks like a flower. Perhaps the cool thing the devs could have done would have been to make a noise happen when a Scarab appears on the battlefield, to let everyone know that a Scarab is present. Just like in Age of Mythology, where the same thing happens when you start to build the Titan Gate. Now I want to share some of the many comments that are similar to my view, that were left on the demo video. As you can see, a lot changed from the demo to the final game, and many noticed this. Halo Wars probably became a much too simplistic game for two main reasons. First, the studio was shutting down, and the developers knew that before the game was to be released. This meant that they probably had a rushed schedule towards the end. Another possible cause could be the constraints towards being on a console and who the company wanted to aim this game at. A lot of time goes into making these videos, so if you enjoyed it, consider leaving a like and subscribing so that I can make more of these. Also, check out my Twitter, Facebook and Twitch down below in the description. Thanks guys.